Welcome
Okay.
everybody back here at Velo Sound. To say it once more, this is one of our last interviews for July, and in August there will be no interviews. We will start back on the first Sunday in September. We already have that interview, and I can assure you it's going to be a banger. It's really going to be a banger. And I'm also very sure that this one will be a banger for everybody who loves post-rock, avant-garde, however you want to call the stuff that he comes up with, he and his collective comes up with. I'm very happy to have Joe from Pijn here with us. Joe, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, no problem. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us. And you, as far as I know, also know some of our interviews. So you should also know the first question that we always ask: band, shirt, merch, anything of the day that you would like to drop.
Oh, what I want to plug, or that I would just want to...
or that you're wearing. I am also wearing something. If anybody asks, I'm wearing Cave In. Nobody can see it, but I will not undress. Says Cave In somewhere at the bottom.
I'm also wearing Cave In.
No! As if we had spoken about it.
Was it planned? Yeah, no, I've got the heavy pendulum long sleeve on.
Yeah, this one is from the Perfect Pitch Black era, so you might recognize it. It's these like,
yeah, that's an OG
stuff. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's actually not OG. I just got it from my friends at Hardcore Health Foundation, who always have stuff like that.
Yeah.
So anybody in Europe, if you want to check out their stuff, it's always for a good cause, and they have some old school shirts sometimes. Joe, something that struck me when I read through the press release and the press kit, and where I felt like, okay, that's a cool icebreaker. How often have the inmates of Strange Ways Prison been filing a complaint about you being too loud?
Well, we've not had too many run-ins with the inmates, but that doesn't mean we've not had any. There was an occasion, I can't remember how many years ago, where there was a sort of like a small riot inside the prison over the living conditions, and someone had like, as part of the protest, sort of bust through a window and got onto the roof, which is like historically what happened in the big riot in like the 90s or something. Yeah. But anyway, this guy was just like up on the roof, and like from where the studio is, you sort of like look down the hill. It's not like it's about like spitting distance, really. Like
speaking distance.
Yeah. Okay. So I was sort of like, not super clued in on what was going on, and I was cycling into work, and I needed to get into the studio, and I had to go through a police barricade and sign a thing saying that I was like would accept an escort to the door of where I had to work, and that when I finished, I would like go straight back out again. And yeah, just it was a slightly like surreal experience, because he ended up being up there for like 3 days or so, which, fair play to him. Like, that takes some doing.
Okay. To clue it up, as far as I remember, your practice space or something is very close to Strange Ways Prison in Manchester. So for everybody out there who might not know about it, you might have heard that Smith's record, Strange Ways. What is it? Strange Ways.
Strange Ways. Here we come.
Here we come. Right. Yeah. And so when I read that, I first was like, Smiths, and then I had to look it up, and then I recognized, it's for prison.
Yeah.
So yeah. Isn't it strange how quickly you can be connected to a Smiths record?
Well,
but before we talk about Manchester and Manchester history, which we will do in a bit, I want to talk, of course, about the new record, because From Low Beams of Hope, to me, is the musical version of that very famous quote by Neil Armstrong when he says, like, a small leap for man, a giant leap for, and here I would insert Pijn, because I think that everybody knows how much we love the band and how much how important we think the band is. But when I listened to From Low Beams, I was struck dead, because I think it's such a huge jump in the development of a band. in a very, very positive direction. And here the first question would be, I'm very sure you also see that progression. You know, not to say that the other records are bad. No, they're all fantastic, but this one is a huge leap. Do you think that also has to do with the fact that it is 5 years in the making now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely been quite a big part of it. Like, in my like line of work as a sort of studio engineer, I kind of, one of the things I sort of like advise everyone really is like the amount of time that you put into a record. Like, you can sort of like really understand like everything that you're trying to do. Like, if you, the more time you put in, the more the like deeper understanding, and you kind of almost want to be sick of it by the time that you're actually recording it. And there should only be like a sort of small percentage of sort of like scope for experimenting and trying out things, which you always should allow for as well. But everything needs time. And so with this being, you know, like from my point of view, it became almost like a vanity project, where it was, we would just keep tweaking and keep like redoing things until it was where I felt that we were getting such like diminishing returns that it was not worth like any more time being spent on it. But we had a like finished version basically around like 2021, I think. So from a finished version, that's now like 3 years ago. It was then a case of like redoing, fine tuning, just reworking until, you know, I was like, okay, I've squeezed as much out of like these things as I can. So yeah, I mean, I think the sort of like project as a whole has kind of like been pretty fully like realized from how I feel about it anyway, which is, you know, just a big relief more than anything.
When you talk about project, are you talking about Pine as a project, or are you talking about From Low Beams of Home as a project?
I think like it's realizing like where, like how I wanted like the band to sound, and you know, the sort of first things that we did in 2017 were like, you know, a definite sort of like blueprint. We were on the way to like trying to sound like this, and you know, I feel like I'm sort of like, oh, well, we've done it. I sound exactly how we want to, but you know, that isn't the case. It's just like that's where I wanted to sort of get to this point, and then we can kind of like progress from here. The kind of basically the balance of melody and like emotion on the new record is something that I'm like most proud of, and that I'm not sick of yet. And with something that you've been working on for that long, if you're already kind of like, it's okay for me to listen back to it rather than listen through and pick holes and hate it.
For me, there are two questions that we directly have to put at the end of your answer. First one, to make it clear, this is not Pine's swan song. It's just the point where you wanted to get, and
yeah,
the
no,
band isn't over.
It's not over yet.
And the second one, you've been talking about balance, which I think is a very interesting idea when we talk about the record. I think the way I heard it, the way I perceived it, there is a lot of emphasis on balance, and it for me is a balance between experimenting and freedom on the one hand, and melody and clear structures on the other. Was that something that you invested a lot of time in, you know, getting that kind of balance right?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of like the real starting point for writing the album came from a more experimental origin. Really, it was watching a Japanese band called Goat and their use of rhythm, which became like something that like was a big focus. But I always wanted to keep a kind of like the sense of melody that like really like emotes something. Like, you know, the big thing for us is kind of like getting across a feeling. It's not necessarily describing that feeling, it's just kind of like conveying a feeling. And like the use of rhythm was like a good starting point. Like an experimental rhythms was like a good sort of starting point for doing something that made it an interesting process for us. But like it would always need that like melodic aspect. So the balance itself was kind of like, it was only if we felt that it was going too far in the weird side that we needed to kind of like pull it back to something.
You've been talking about the writing process. When you start writing stuff, are you directly writing tracks, or are you writing parts that then later are assembled into, for example, now 4 tracks?
Yeah, it's more the parts. We'll have like lots of bits and seeing if they can work together. Like generally with this album wanting to sort of feel like, you know, one continuous thing that, you know, is the 4 tracks. It was all going to be in the same sort of key. So, you know, melody wise, we were all kind of like working in the same sort of register. So we just have a load of bits, and it was a case of like, okay, we want to sort of like this track or like this bit works with this bit, and we can kind of like start to then stitch something together. But yeah, the ideas, particularly for this album, were a bit more like piecemeal. It was like the larger picture was always kind of the goal. And even though we had like 2, like track 1 and track 3 as finished songs, and then pulled together ideas for 2 and 4, like that, we always knew that that was going to be track 1 and track 3, if that makes sense. Like the parts had always kind of like been roughly in that sort of order.
Was it also clear that those 2 would be the opening tracks for side A and side B on the vinyl?
I think initially we'd thought about just having like, there was a time when it was going to be just like a sort of like 2-track release, and we were like, but we're not getting out of track 1, like it doesn't go smoothly into the next one.
Yeah.
So that was always like, oh, I need to put something. But the sort of like, this is, you know, going back a few years now, it was kind of, oh, maybe we would just put out a couple of tracks just to kind of like keep things going. But it actually turned into this bigger body of work because we didn't feel like those pieces like slotted together in the sort of a way that like represented what we were trying to do. So we had to write an extra 2 and make an album.
Just write 2 tracks, 12 minutes each. It's like a little interlude.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah, no, it took us years.
We also maybe should talk a little bit about the process that it took, or why it took those 5 years, if I understand it correctly, or if I got the gist correctly. There are also some other outside reasons why it took you so long. I've read something about a flood, lineup change, or stuff like that. So somewhere I read something as if the record was recorded twice. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, there, just behind me, there's another sort of finished version, as a test press actually. But
if
like,
you don't need that, just send it to me. I'll take it. I
it's
won't tell
basically
anyone.
the same. Yeah, no. So we had done a sort of like completed sort of piece, And then it was around, sort of the tail end of the pandemic, and everyone's like priorities in life and all that had sort of like changed, and so we brought in like new people to kind of like keep the band going. Really, I sort of wanted to see things through, and so I brought in like new people, and that kind of like new influence and new sort of like vibe or whatever. I felt like releasing an album, because it was still going to be a few years from that point, but like putting out an album that like they were just covering effectively didn't feel like a kind of genuine representation for them. So we I took the time to sort of re-record and like really bed in like the new guys who had sort of joined, and allow them to have their sort of input and flavor on everything, really. And that opened up a whole new sort of world of ideas, like instrumentation that we didn't sort of previously have access to, that was like, oh, well, we could use that in place of where there might have been a vocal or something. And so that kind of like process like added a lot of it was like the majority of the time delay, I suppose. It was because of my decision to like, well, if we have the ability to re-record it, because it's just me that's doing it and I'll just do it in my spare time, then we may as well do it. But that plan was slightly scuppered with two incidences of the studio flooding. So the first one, I was busy tracking percussion with someone, and we'd done most of their album, and then he starts just doing a little sort of like shaker or something, and there's a little tap going on, and I was like, oh, it's not quite in time. And he was like, what are you on about? And then he came through, and this tapping was still going on, and I looked over, and there was just like some water tapping through the ceiling above like the desk, and just like onto the side. It was like hitting a piece of paper, and then it all kind of kicked off from that point. I had to rush upstairs and try and get into access the unit above us to figure out what had gone on. And I felt terrible for them, because they'd lost thousands of pounds worth of stock that was sitting on the floor of this unit when a frozen pipe had thawed, burst, and just trashed all their stuff. But being the unit underneath, it was only a matter of time until it sort of snuck through, and started tapping away at the side of on my left ear, basically. So that shut down sessions for a little while. And in the process of like drying everything out, getting everything going, that ate into re-recording time, or like time that I'd set aside to actually work on the album. And then there was another instance of like a burst pipe, or just like heavy rain and a broken drain sort of system, and a dodgy landlord, all those kind of like just nightmare combination of things that meant that it happened on someone else's session. It was maybe like 5 or 6 months after that, and I was like just catching up and just able to reschedule time to get everyone back into the studio. And then it floods again, and all my spare time is then eaten up because I'm trying to rearrange things. So it was it just wasn't meant to be until until
2024. Yeah. Because I figure that in your studio, you're not only working on Pijn, you're also working with other artists, like using the studio probably as like your source of income.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's been like that for a few years, and so when something like that goes that drastically wrong, it's a bit like, okay, I need to prioritize getting that sorted. My silly little band. Right.
Yeah, and then of course, the bands, of course, I can see that the bands that book time with you then have to be rearranged and all that. Yeah. I can see the time consummation there. It's interesting that you're talking about recording all of the things yourself, and that also leads perfectly into the next question. You have started your own label right now, Floodlit Records,
Yes,
or Floodlit Recordings to be precise. Why?
Well, as part of the delay, and all, the fallout from our sort of like previous label, we'd found ourselves sort of without an actual kind of like home for it. And over the last like couple of years, I'd had like a lot of kind of like, I don't know, reasonably sort of like profound conversations with some of the artists that were like recording with me, where they were asking for advice on like who they should pitch the album to be released on, and what sort of things might help them get to like a certain point, and I was using the experience that I had to kind of like find out, like, was like, well, what do you even want from like a label? Like, what is it that that's the driving force for it? And a lot of times artists would say that they wanted like a kind of like community, almost like a little group of like similar bands, whether they are similar in sound or just similar in ethos. They just wanted a little kind of like group. And I had this sort of like wonderful experience of working with the now defunct Holy Raw. But for a time, we sort of toured with a bunch of Holy Raw bands. We did the collaboration with Conjurer. We had like, we would see someone at every single show. There'd be at least like one person from another band on the same label, and like you really started to feel like part of something, and like it was a really just like positive kind of like reinforcement all the time, and there was so much like great music kind of like coming out of that time, and it was something that I was incredibly lucky to be part of. And I know that that Church Road Records has started and sort of like picked up from where they left off, but I almost wanted to make something of my own like that, like that, a kind of nurturing sort of environment where like someone can ask person X from like whatever band, oh, who did your artwork or who mastered your record, and like everyone's just helpful and offering to share information and helping each other to kind of like make the best sort of release, or the best like the best art that they can, if we want to get really kind of like deep on it. But it started to feel like it's like, oh, everyone's kind of like, well, not everyone, but like a lot of people are like asking me about this, and I'm part of the process. I'm like capturing and mixing these records for people. Like I'm already involved in the chain. Like why don't I have a go at sort of seeing it through, so that there's the possibility of, if someone came to work with me in the studio and they were unsure of what they wanted to do with the record, then I could have a chat and be like, if we're on the same page kind of like creatively, like why not see it through, and why not like help them bring it into like a physical release, or like I have a slightly more experience in releasing music than someone doing it for the first time, let's say.
Of course.
Like
of course.
I might be a beginner plus 6 months or something, and so but that 6 months like saves the next person 6 months, and so all the sort of things I've realized and failed with initially, they don't have to find out the hard way themselves. It's like I may as well just share that sort of like knowledge, I suppose. And so I kind of decided to do it and to test out the sort of idea on myself, make my own band the guinea pig kind of thing, and work out all the things not to do when releasing albums.
But then it is less of a creative control thing and more of a collective idea thing, right?
Yeah, I think I it allowed me to have a lot of like creative control over like the physical release and stuff, like things that would have been maybe out of budget for a label that were investing in us. I was, able to, sacrifice my own money basically, because we're not seeing any of it back. But like, it made me feel like this is how the record should be realized. It should have these extra bits. It should have, the attention to detail that like I wanted to give, that like really I wouldn't be able to get out of trusting someone else, or not like trusting someone else, but like someone else isn't going to be as invested. They're going to be
not as detail driven, right?
Yeah. And I'm hoping to sort of apply how I've done that for my own record to like the other releases that I'm going to work on, because the sort of stipulation for anything with Floodlit is that I'm only going to work on things that have like, I'm only going to release things that have been worked on with me in the studio. Like that it's only going to be bands that I've like been in the trenches with whilst we're all having a meltdown trying to create an album or an EP or something. And that we've been through it, and I know that we're on the same page, and that like that it can be a positive thing kind of like going forward from there, really.
Understandably. And I also like that idea of something like a collective. What came to my mind, and it struck me because the record is very positively avant-garde in a way. It's not the simple 24/7 kind of post-rock that you get from a lot of bands, and not just loud versus quiet. It's not just crescendos and arpeggios. It's a lot more. A lot of that has to do with the instrumentation, which we'll come to later, but it also, I think, has to do with that openness of character. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm very sure it's not a direct influence, but there is something about the record that immediately reminded me of Ashenspire from Scotland.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Would you say like this openness of music was one of the most important things here in this record? It's touching a lot of terrains. It's touching a lot of genres and stuff.
Yeah, and I think like Ashenspire are like, they're a brilliant band. And they have really sort of kind of like come from the world of black metal, but with a sort of touchstone in a million different other genres and stuff. And that sort of thing is incredibly inspiring. It's like if you see a band able to do that with a genre such as black metal, which over the last few years, there've been like breakout moments where that's the genre has touched on post rock and shoegaze and stuff, and they make a very nice combination. But like to take post rock or post metal or wherever we kind of like sit, and to try and allow all the other influence in, like that it's really sort of like kind to and really like nice to hear that someone sort of like feels like it's not just kind of crescendo core, that there's a little wider sort of like influence, because we did work quite hard to try and have that openness with it, and that was helped by the kind of collaborative aspect of just like asking people that we knew that would do X, Y, and Z, like if they could play on the album, and then eventually if like maybe they could join or something like that. Like that's how things had historically been. And it's maybe slightly different now, but we're trying to sort of be a bit more settled. But like I still will always want like recorded material to be a collaborative thing, because that's something that really like excites me. It's like, as a creative kind of like project, like getting like external influence, whether that's just like challenging what structure or melody I would typically kind of like go for, to have like someone and like throw something completely like left field that I didn't even think of. Like I always want to try and be open to that. And yeah, a band like Ash Inspire is a fantastic example of someone who's done that really well.
If anybody doesn't know which band we're talking about, go back, I think, what is it, nearly 2 years ago?
Yeah.
We had a very, very long conversation with the driving force behind Ash Inspire, with Alistair. Also on the record, and I think, you know, if you listen to Hostile Architecture and you want to know more about it, I think our interview is a good point to start with. And I'm very glad that we were there before they became big, which they deserve.
Yeah.
Totally. So a little shout out to our friends in Scotland. What is interesting is that the record combines a lot of things. I was just talking to my little girl a few hours ago, and I wanted her to tell me her feelings when I started listening to the record, and she said, "Okay, if I listen to Our Endless Hours, it sounds like a very action-packed movie, and it's like leading up, leading up, leading up." And I thought that was a very good description for the beginning. And then I listened to other tracks and I was like, yeah, it fits the beginning very well. But if I listen to Carved Expanse, or if I listen to 1,000 Tired Lives, it's again very different. And that's where what you've mentioned, right? It's not just this, and it's not just that. It's tipping toes into a lot of ponds, isn't it?
Yeah. And you know, to sort of for us, like especially with like a 4-track album, we didn't want like all 4 tracks to be the same. So a lot of things had to be, you know, it was like quite a conscious effort to try different things. Maybe with the same sort of like starting point of like we're starting with a rhythm or whatever, or we're starting with this particular idea, but to really like not just put out 4 of the same songs, because when they're like 12 minutes long, if it's the same song that you've heard twice, like you're gonna get bored. So
yeah, that's true. I've heard that you're also putting out a bonus EP with reworkings of the record.
yeah, that's right. I mean, some eagle-eyed vinyl purchasers have already got it. But yeah, we are putting that out. It's not got a set release date. It's going to be probably at the end of the month or something, because it's basically just it was done as a way for us to explore like a different aspect of the record, really. Like there was more of this atmospheric and sort of like drone influence in places, and it's something that, like, you know, I have a massive interest in. And so it was, yeah, I basically sat down with Tom Ragsdale, who plays like keys and does tape loops and plays bass 6 and does a bit of everything on the record. And we kind of took all the stems from the tracks and started running bits through different pieces of gear, and it was almost like less of a like complete reimagining and more like completely warping the sounds that we had and reacting to what they were. And so if some of it felt like we needed to add piano parts, or it was like, oh, we could almost like hear a guitar part with this, so just grab a guitar and quickly like put that in. So it was all done very quickly, but like the process being so different to what we sort of like normally do, was like really kind of like, again, it's like creatively kind of like inspiring to work in a different environment and with a different approach. And even though I had it like a little notebook with a few, this sort of thing, these kind of pointers are where I'd like to try to push things. Like I had been listening to a lot of oh my word, I can't remember the name of the band. You know, when it was I was about to say it and then I've forgotten the name. It's not a Silver Mount Zion. It was more like
Godspeed? No.
no, not Godspeed. It, oh, this is extremely frustrating now. I have to edit this
Is
bit out.
is it from Quebec?
No, it's a two-piece, and they're just like synths and sort of neoclassical. Oh, yeah, this is
There are too
just
many out there to name.
yeah.
Maybe it'll come back to you.
Yeah, I'll get back on that one. But they have this minimalist. It's very just like textures and the odd sort of like piano thing, and I found myself like listening to a lot of that sort of music, and so it was a kind of let's have a go at doing that, and but using our own source material to explore that and see if a lot of the thematic kind of like content of the record was about like perspective, and so it felt like really appropriate to do a new perspective on our own material.
I also would like to talk about perspectives when I'm thinking about the track title, or not the track title, the record title, From Low Beams of Hope. Of course, from a beam, you can look upward and you can look downward. So positively and negatively. When you think of a record title, is it a positive one or a more negative one?
I think it's more of a positive one. It's pretty ambiguous. You can kind of like see it like whichever way feels appropriate, and that was that kind of like balance between sort of like tragic feelings and like triumph or whatever, and feeling like really optimistic is like that balance between that is like something that's pretty consistent through what we were trying to do. So yeah, for me, like the album was from a point of like really trying to be positive. And so I will kind of like always see it as like an attempt to look up. It's for me, it's like that's going to be tied to that.
It's also interesting because I think it's somewhat reflected in the cover, which also is somewhat ambiguous. You have like this golden orange lit room, which you're looking at, and more or less 2/3 of the cover are black, for lack of better words. So it could be either you're not allowed to come in or you're just moving towards it. Was that also something that you told the person who did the cover? So we want something that is balanced, that could be both?
Kind of like the actual framing of that picture, like it was only ever supposed to be like a placeholder. It was only like a kind of like guide before we actually took the real picture, but we just ended up sort of like kind of attaching to the image, and like it's interesting that like the kind of like whole thing it is what you're considering, whereas like for me and like the actual focus of the picture was just supposed to be like representative of a little part of it, and it was only ever supposed to be the little bit of carpet in front of the doorway, and that was the kind of I was just like, oh, this room, and we've got the lights that we use on stage, we're just gonna light a space with that. And our friend who's who done a lot of the photography for us was like, you should focus on given that, especially what I was saying previously, that for me this is about looking up and looking forward, and it was like, well, why don't you acknowledge the things that help you look up and look forward, and one of the things was my parents' dog. And so the idea I'd had initially was for the artwork to basically just be a really close-up picture of our like family dog, but she had passed away before we got to the point of actually finishing the record or anything like that. So when I was trying to think of other ideas for it, we ended up settling on just like a photo. It was this like placeholder of the spot where she would kind of like go to have a little nap, and it's just like, oh, if we'd ever lost the dog, like she would just be there. And it just you know, part of me is just like, but this is, the picture is not what I really would have liked to have as the cover, but it had this sort of like poignant kind of like meaning, and everything that the band has done has always had a sort of like deeper sort of like poignant meaning, or it's always very personal. So it felt sort of, it kind of became appropriate, I guess, as we went on.
I have one more question before we go to the infamous quickfire round. When this is released on July 21st, you will already have played, or you by now already played Desert Fest, and you will have played Mangata Festival. You have dates announced for Samhain and Damnation. Any other live plans that we should know about?
Yeah, so there's going to be a handful of shows in September. One in Sheffield that is an old promoter who sort of put on my first band back in the day. Had taken a 10-year gap from promoting shows and is dipping his toe back in. So that's definitely worth a check out. There's bands like Baal are going to be on there, and a lot of other sort of like, you know, old Sheffield heads are in the lineup there. So that's going to be a nice sort of mates fest. And then there's another show which hasn't been announced yet. But then at the end of the year, like Link, Samhain, and Damnation, we have a tour with Hippotractor and Sugar Horse. It's kind of like a
festival, eh?
yeah.
Super, okay.
And they're doing the Night of Salvation, like pelagic stage.
Yeah.
And then we're playing the Saturday after them.
Yeah.
But the rest of the dates are sort of like around Europe, and we have like 2 in the UK. So from the 23rd or 24th of October until the 2nd of November, we'll be away with those guys, and that'll be amazing because Hippotractor have just put out a brilliant album.
Yeah. And Sugar Horse's new album is also...
I've only heard like the 2 or 3 songs that they've put out already.
You know, of course, I've heard it a little bit earlier, and it's a really good one. It's but that's a good thing of music journalism. Yeah, so 2 amazing bands. Hippotractor's new album is fantastic. And I also like the Sugar Horse record. But I have to say, out of those 3, so sorry to all my friends in the other bands. Sorry. but that guy here with Pijn, that's like top 10 record of the year. You know, I'm very sorry to say that. Not for top 10 record, but for the other bands. We love all of you, but that guy did something. I mean, like, he had 5 years to make a good record. Come on, like, it should be worth something. Cool. So that's very cool to hear, because I know that a lot of people have been raving about your live performances, also about, you know, the things that you have done with Conjurer. And I want to take that as our lead into the infamous quickfire round. You know how it works. Everybody out there who's listening for the first time, he'll get a couple of questions, always something like, okay, AC versus DC, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, London versus Glasgow, something like that. He has to choose and has to give a short explanation for his choice. Let's start with collaborations. And I based my idea on the new record. Who would you rather collaborate with? John Zorn or Hidden Orchestra?
Oh, John Zorn.
Okay, that was a quick one. Which main stage would you love to play more? Glastonbury or Arctangent?
It's Arctangent. Like, it would still be a dream to play Glastonbury, but like having graced the Arctangent main stage once, and it just feeling like the most pinnacle thing, I was like, yeah, okay, that'd be great. And no one would like us at Glastonbury anyway, so probably better to stick us on a small.
We've been talking about Ashenspire, and we all love this kind of avant-garde jazz infused black metal that we're doing. And when I was talking to Alistair, we also talked about Imperial Triumphant. So you'll get the choice between Ashenspire and Imperial Triumphant.
I'm gonna go with Ashenspire. As much as I love the gold masks and spraying champagne everywhere, I think I'll stick with Ashenspire.
It's interesting over a couple of years. I would not have thought that before, but I've said it before. I also said it in my review, and I stick to it. Ashenspire is a more exciting version of Imperial Triumphant.
That's a good take.
Yeah, and I know that the guy in Imperial Triumphant will now hate me after having done the interview with us, but who cares? Again, another interview that people can look back at in our archive, Imperial Triumphant. When we're talking about post-rock, which band would you rather listen to right now? Godspeed You Black Emperor or Mono?
Godspeed, I think.
Did you listen to the new Mono record?
I've not listened to it yet. No. And I know that it's quite an important one, so I need to get on it.
It's a really good one. Not only because it's one of the last things that they did with Albini.
Yeah.
But the songwriting is just it's very elegant. It's
really
nice. And again, 8 weeks back, interview with Mono here on this channel. I know you have your own label, and I really appreciate that because I think it's always cool when people dip into that. But if you could choose to release a record on one of the following two labels, which one would you rather have? Rock Action Records or 1,000 Arms?
Rock Action, I think. Like we are sort of like being kind of like released by 1,000 Arms because CJ
in the US, right?
US, which is an absolute dream, by the way. Like, it's amazing to have that sort of setup. But how could you turn down like Stuart Braithwaite and Mogwai?
Yeah, Stuart, if you're listening to this, I'd still like to do a Christmas interview with you. I'll get him at some point. I'm very sure.
On the list.
As we were talking about the title of the record, From Low Beams of Hope. For me, also looking at the record cover, it's a positive thing. The cover is, for me, somewhat like providing hope. And it's also those low beams of light and stuff like that. What is providing more hope for you? A bright neon light under the door shining through, or candlelight rooms upstairs when you're looking down, when you're looking up, sorry?
The neon door, I think. I think the candle, like, too spooky.
Okay. Last one before we come to a few more English questions. Last year, friends of ours in Grails released an awesome return record with Encore and Mod. And even though I know that Emil hates being put into a genre, but it is some kind of sexy doom jazz. And which doom jazz would you rather listen to right now? Grails or Kilimanjaro Dark Jazz Ensemble?
Oof. I have to go with Grails, because staring me like just behind where the camera is the playlist I made of the set they played in Manchester like a couple of months ago. Because it's one of my favorite shows I've ever been to, and so whenever I'm stuck for something to listen to, I just go straight to that. And I love Kilimanjaro Dark Jazz Orchestra, but Ensemble, but it's got to be Grails.
Do you also like that kind of sexual tension vibe that is going on in Ankara and Mat?
I hadn't quite picked up on as much of the sexual tension in it as,
You gotta listen to it. There is a lot of 17 softcore music in there, and they even admit that.
Yeah, we have that sort of backdrop, don't they, when they play?
So, as we're talking to a Manchester lad, let's put it like that. City versus United.
United.
One shitty club versus the other. Which Manchester band do you think is more important, the Smiths or Oasis?
For me, it's Oasis.
And we only stick to the music, not to where Morrissey went with his.
Yeah. He's sort of frowned upon. No, I know that they are a vital band, but it's Oasis. That's kind of what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm. And the last one. What would you rather have for lunch or dinner tomorrow? Bangers and mash or fish and chips?
Oh, fish and chips. True Brit.
Okay. Do you have like a favorite chipper in Manchester where you go to?
Yeah, well, our local one is Atlantic Fish Bar. And they had a shout out on a podcast dedicated to talking about fish and chips and bands. Yeah, it was good to see the sort of like local heroes get a shout out. The only downside is that I don't eat fish, and so there's no like actual like fish equivalent I can get there. I'd have to go somewhere. Like there's some places in town, hip hop chip shop that does like toefish and banana blossom ones.
Okay, cool. So for everybody, we'll also try to link those if we find them online. So. Joe, thanks for the time and thanks for all the detailed answers and the cool insight into the new record. For everybody, check out From Low Beams of Hope. It's been out for a few weeks now. When you're listening to this, it's 3.5 weeks or something like that. Really great record. Take your time. 4 tracks, 45 minutes. Really impressive. If you like what we do, maybe subscribe here to our channel. If you want to do a little bit more, you can also donate here via YouTube. Give us a link on our socials or like a subscription on our socials would be cool. And don't forget, listen to this man. And if you have a chance to see him and his collective on stage, do so. So, Joe, for you, the chance of final last words to the listeners.
I guess, well, mainly thank you to you for like the time and like how sort of like deeply you've like listened to and kind of like experienced the record. Like it's incredibly flattering. And if anyone else also wants to sort of like listen to it in the same way that you have, like that's the kind of like highest compliment that we can get as musicians and stuff. So yeah, thank you. And everyone should go and have a listen if they like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Everybody should have a listen, but don't go to Strange Way Prisons. You know, you can also just go and get it, Bandcamp, record store, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
Joe, enjoy the rest of your evening and thanks for your time, my friend.
Thank you so much.